Welcome to the Westside Universalist Unitarian, or should I say Unitarian Universalist Church, where compassion leads us to work for justice and equality. I'm glad you came today, and it's my hope that you will find something here that nourishes your heart, feeds your mind, and grows your spirit. My name is Darren Cote, and I'm your worship leader this morning. This is my first service as worship leader. Most of you may know that. Thank you. I just wanted to thank just a few people for helping me along in this process. Tanner Trask, Carol Kappa, Carolyn Nixon, and a few others on the worship team. Thank you so much for your support and helping getting me up to speed. Be you a spiritual seeker, an atheist, or a theist, Westside is a community of many beliefs, genders, and sexualities, a community of diverse cultural, racial, and class backgrounds, a community of varied abilities and gifts. Some here find inspiration in the great books, others in the great outdoors, and others still in great conversations. Whoever you may be, all are welcome in our inclusive congregation. To newcomers and old friends alike, together we say, welcome. At Westside, we are raising the next generation of Unitarian Universalists, and we want them to know they are an important part of our community. Several years ago, we chose to be a radically inclusive and to adopt a multi-generational worship where our services include all family members. So welcome to all children and youth of all ages. There are a number of announcements in your order of service. They are included in there as, so if you open that up, you should be able to see them. Please take any of them with you that you might need for reminders this week or to share with others. And for those of you online that are joining us today online or visiting with us today for the first time, if you are not already on our mailing list, please sign up by clicking the link at the bottom of the westsideu.org website. And for those of you here in person with us, please take a moment to silence all of your devices. This morning, the reflection will be given by Dr. Zachary Moore. We are delighted and privileged to welcome Dr. Moore, a secular humanist, officiant, and community leader in North Texas. Zach previously served as the president of the board of directors of Foundation Beyond Belief, a secular humanist charitable organization, and as treasurer of Camp Quest, Texas, a summer camp that promotes free thinking and humanist values. Zach also was executive director of the Fellowship of Free Thought Dallas and the coordinator of the Dallas-Fort Worth Coalition of Reason. He blogs at doubtingthomases.net and hosts a podcast at apologia-podcast.net. Now, I invite you to take a deep breath and from wherever you are, settle into this sacred space that we create, and let us worship together as we listen to this morning's prelude, Thank You for Being a Friend by Andrew Gold, performed by Dr. Yuki Kumamoto. I was telling Yuki earlier that had I not had my hands full here this morning, I would maybe try to pitch in to help that. It's hard not to sing along on that song, isn't it? Our opening words this morning are, "We cast not our eyes below," by Ma Teresa Tet Gustilo Gallardo. We cast not our eyes below. We say to ourselves, we are how we came, wounded from struggles, triumphant in our survival, entitled by birthright to belong to this, the only humankind there is, saying, I am included, I belong, I am here, I will be and do. I will breathe joy into desolation, I will breathe peace into conflict, I will breathe life into destruction. I will be the earth I wish to see. I am growth and hope and glee. The chalice represents the Unitarian Universalist Association, or UUA, and is a symbol of the Unitarian Universalist faith. The flaming chalice is a symbol of both the heritage of our past and the light of hope within the church today. Our chalice lighting words, "A chalice lighting for the dark and light," are by Francis Koziar. May we light this chalice this morning to remind us of the power and beauty of balance and contrast. It is darkness that can make the flame of a single candle so powerful, and light that deepens those shadows in turn. A chalice flame is the meeting point, the union of the refuge, safety, and incredible beauty of darkness, and the warmth, the assurance, and the joy of light. May this act of lighting, which I did a little early, I apologize. May this act of lighting our chalice this morning remind us that we are stronger together in all the complexities and all the disagreements of relationship, because we are different and because we are one. Our opening hymn, and let me first make a correction too, on page 2 of your booklet this morning, the offertory song, instead of Jupiter, Yuki is going to be playing My Favorite Things by Richard Rogers. Our opening hymn is number 318, We Would Be One, in the gray hymnal. Please stand if you are able and so moved, and join our song leader, Linda Ice.
As one we
Thank you, Linda. Please remain standing and join in me in our affirmation. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to work for justice through action, to serve others in community, to the end that all shall grow into harmony with creation. Thus do we covenant with one another. You may be seated. Please come forward if you are young at heart or would like to have a close-up view of our Time for All Ages presenter, Nikki Kennedy.
Good morning, everyone. I've gotten to meet so many new friends today. This is so exciting, especially in the summer. Here you go, Alice and James. James, you want one? You can get your own too. You guys need help? You're gonna get that one, Henley? Awesome. Rusty, did you find one? Let's see, would you guys like a cushion? Thank you. One for the kitty, very important. Animals are always included. Very important. Okay, I am so excited to be here with all of you today. You know, as I've been thinking about this summer, and as I did some traveling to a big conference in Pittsburgh with a whole bunch of other Unitarian Universalists, and as I've been listening to conversations, we're all meeting new people. Today I've met I've met at least 7 new people. That's pretty exciting. Maybe some of you have met someone new or are going to meet someone new. And it made me want to share this book with you. You are new, Henley, and we're so excited you're here. This is a book about new people and new places. And it's called We Are a Rainbow. We are moving to a new country. Rusty, you want to move a little bit closer? You can move over here by Amelia. New places and new faces. So many new and different things. Where I come from, there is a rabbit in the moon. But here there's a man in the moon. There, the ocean is nice and warm. Here, the ocean is nice and cool. There, the leaves of the palm trees swayed next to my pink adobe house. Here, the oak branches wave next to my blue wooden house. There, we give handshakes, hugs, and kisses to everyone. But here, handshakes are for new people. I would also add fist bumps. I think those are important. Handshakes are for new people, and hugs and kisses are for very special ones. There, I would eat tortillas for breakfast. Have any of you ever had a tortilla for breakfast? Anyone? Yeah, me too. Here, people have them for dinner. Well, sometimes we have them for breakfast. Sometimes we have them for lunch, Amelia. That is true. We eat tortillas all the time, especially in Texas, for everything. To you, I may seem different, but to me, you seem different too. I try hard to understand what you say, and you try hard to understand me too. When we do not understand each other, we feel bad, we fight, we hurt, we cry. We separate, we stop trying to find a new way to be together. Apart, alone, please stop and think. Are we as different as we think? I say soul, you say sun. I know some of you are bilingual, and you guys don't know this book is in English and Spanish, so I can see the kids reading it in Spanish. But no matter how we say it, it is the same one. We all like to run and play. We all like to dance and sing. And some of us like to talk. We really are so much the same. And it is much more fun to be together, to share, to care, to smile, and to laugh when we're together. Our tears and our smiles are like the rain and the sun. They help our friendship to grow. And friendships are like rainbows. They shine for everyone. So I hope as you begin a new week today, you guys find new things and old things, maybe meet someone new, maybe get to see an old friend, and I hope you guys share your smiles and your excitement. There's a lot of excitement to share summer adventures, so I hope you guys will continue to share them, and I am so glad you're all here today, and I look forward to more adventures. Thank you.
When I come again, I'll get her.
Perfect. Thank you, Henley. Thank you guys for all being here this week. Come on, Rusty.
We leave this friendly
did really
place.
well with one hand.
We'll sing through this twice.
Thank you. Here, I got it. Oh, you're good.
As we leave this friendly place,
Thank you.
love give light to every face. May the kindness which we learn light our hearts till we return. As we leave this friendly place, love give light to every face. May the kindness which we learn light our hearts till we return.
John, you ready to come up this morning? So John is going to be doing our joys and concerns this morning.
Good morning. My name is John Fisher. I am your pastoral care associate this morning. In our community here at the West Side, we make time each week to share pieces of each other, of our lives with one another. Slow down, John. We do that. Getting over a cold too. Pardon. I beg your pardon. Thank you. Thank you. We make time each week to share pieces of our lives with one another. We do this because each person in this community has value. Each person's experience matters. Please submit your joys and concerns to the team by completing one of these forms at the welcome desk or emailing us at pastoralcare@westsideu.org or contacting any member of the team. All right. We share our concerns with one another, knowing that sorrows come into each person's life, knowing that together we offer comfort. We did not receive any concerns this morning. We also share our joys with one another, knowing too that joy comes into all of our lives, knowing that together our voices can rise in a course of celebration. A joy from Linda and Myron Ice and Bodie McMurray. Linda and Bodie are both celebrating double-digit birthdays this week. Linda's is a literal double digit, and she turned 66 today. And Bodie will celebrate his first double-digit birthday as he turns 10 on Wednesday. We are so happy to get to celebrate our birthdays together during Bodie's summer visits. And the other joy I have is right in line with that. From Caroline Nixon, happy birthday to our birthday twins. Today, Linda Ice and Caroline Nixon. Oh, Caroline too, okay. I see. I hope these 21-year-olds paint the town tonight. Not every joy or concern can be shared openly in community. Some must be shared eye to eye or simply held in the heart. We further recognize that some do not have voices with which to speak the depth of their pain or the height of their celebration. We make space each week for musical centering, knowing the life and experience of every person matters, and together our lights shine brighter. As we hold all the joys among us, both those unspoken and spoken, let us center to number 1002, Comfort Me in the Teal Hymnal.
My name is Caroline Nixon, and I invite you to relax your mind and body and join in a time of meditation. It will begin with an introduction before we move into a minute of silence. Our Tibetan prayer bowl will sound to signal the start of your own meditation, prayer, or reflection, and it will sound again at the end. Our introduction this morning is Empathy is a Choice We Make by Leslie Jameson. Feel free to close your eyes and take a deep breath if you'd like. Empathy isn't just something that happens to us. a meteor shower of synapses firing across the brain. It's also a choice we make to pay attention, to extend ourselves. It's made of exertion, that dowdier cousin of impulse. Sometimes we care for another because we know we should, or because it's asked for. But this doesn't make our caring hollow. The act of choosing simply means we've committed ourselves to a set of behaviors greater than the sum of our individual inclinations. This confession of effort chafes against the notion that empathy should always rise unbidden, that genuine means the same thing as unwilled, that intentionality is the enemy of love. But I believe in intention and I believe in work. I believe in waking up in the middle of the night and packing our bags and leaving our worst selves for our better ones. May it be so, blessed be, and amen.
Thank you, Carolyn. The great end of all the world's faith traditions is to bring the human being closer to the divine by acts of creation and compassion. In the generous spirit of generosity, Westside chooses to reach out to our wider community. Westside's plate offering for July will go to Texas Native Health, formerly the Urban Intertribal Center of Texas. Since 1971, this nonprofit has provided culturally sensitive, community-based services to American Indians and Alaska Natives living in the DFW Metroplex and beyond. The center serves those who are members of federally recognized tribes. Its services include primary, dental, and behavioral health care. This one-stop location in Dallas also provides a pharmacy, employment, and training programs, and a communal center designed as a co-shared workspace to tribal representatives who perform outreach for North Texas tribal members. Recently, in partnership with the University of North Texas at Dallas, employees packed the back room of the center for a mental health first aid training. The goal of the mental health first aid is to equip people with the tools they need to de-escalate a mental health crisis in an approachable way rather than a clinical one. It also aims to create awareness of being culturally sensitive. Dora Brought Plenty has been coming to the clinic since the 1970s. At 21, she was looking to process experiences she had at a Native American boarding school as a child. Brought Plenty said mental health practitioners she saw before coming to Texas Native Health Care had not a clue how to teach or treat us. Texas Native Health is her safe haven. Please give generously as you are able to support the vital work of this organization. Now let us enjoy this musical offering performed by Yuki, My Favorite Thing, by Richard Rogers. Thank you for putting together into practice the spiritual virtue of generosity. Our giving connects us to the wider web of the community. And thank you for also keeping your stewardship commitment current to keep our congregation's important work going. And now, I turn the pulpit over to our guest speaker, Dr. Zachary Moore.
Very much, Darren. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. Could you switch over to the slides? Okay. I do have some slides to show with my presentation here today. They're going to get them up in just a second. But yeah, it's been a few years since I've spoken here at West Side, and a lot of things have happened in that time, and things in my own life have changed. So you might have noticed in the bio that Darren was reading, a lot of those positions are former positions, and that's by design. I've spent the last sort of couple years enjoying a bit of a hiatus from active participation in the local humanist community. I spent about a decade and a half doing all the work that was mentioned there, and I've decided to focus on sort of more personal, more private things in my life right now, but it's always a joy and a pleasure to come and join with congregations such as yours and share some of my thoughts. And the thoughts that I had today centered around a concept that I've been thinking about for a while. And I call this the fellowship of adversary. And you know, there's a lot of adversary in our lives. There's a lot of conflict in our lives and in the wider society right now. And to a certain extent, this has always been the case, right? But I was thinking about some of the ideas around these challenges that we have and the fellowship that often comes about as we interact with the adversary that we find in our lives. And the thing that I was most interested in starting off with is an initial concept that a lot of us are probably familiar with. This is probably something that gets talked about quite a lot. It's a false dichotomy that we're confronted with constantly about us versus them. What is the us and what is the them? And when thinking about the us, what is it that actually binds us together? When we talk about us, where does that come from? Where does that us come from? And when I think about that, I think about things like jumping ahead a little bit here. Yeah, I'll try to point it directly at it. Yeah, so I think about this verse a lot. So I come from a Christian background originally, and so when I think about sacred texts, the Christian scriptures come to mind a lot. And when I think about this concept of us, what is it that the Bible has said about us? And there's this verse that sticks out to me from Mark, where Jesus says, anyone who is not against us is for us. So the us is sort of defined by this concept of adversary. There's this us versus them. So anyone that's not against us is for us. Anyone that's not opposed to us is for us, is part of that. And it seems like a very nice sort of inclusive way of looking at it. Well, as long as you're not actively opposing us, we'll accept you as part of our group. Right? But in practice, what does this look like? Well, in practice, the us comes from things like, our families. That's sort of the initial, the core of what us is. I think of, myself, my parents recently had a couple critical health problems back in Ohio, where I'm from, and I drove 1,000 miles in a single day to get back to them to help them out, because they're family, and that's who they are as my parents is kind of a core part of who I am, for better or for worse. And I think about my son, who I just a couple weeks ago sent to Ohio as well to spend 2 weeks with my brother and his kids, because spending that time with family is not something that he often gets a chance to do. And that was very meaningful to him. That was very valuable to him. That was something that informed a core part of who he is. And I also think about my girlfriend's family. So her parents just came to visit us for several weeks as well. And she was very happy to see them and speak with them. And her kids are very happy to see their grandparents and talk with them and sort of reconnect. And so that family unit, that core identity is sort of where things start. But it also extends over into things like our friends, right? The people that we associate with, not because we have to, but because we want to. People that have shared interests with us. Maybe they enjoy the same hobbies as us. And they like talking with us for whatever reasons. But they become part of that us as well. And then I think about people who labor together with us, people who share in our work, who share our goals, our professional goals, the things that we're trying to accomplish in this world. They become part of the us. They understand who we are in kind of a way that nobody else does, the people that labor shoulder to shoulder with us. And then I think about sort of the broader culture, the culture that we're sort of brought up in, and the little things, things like food, right? So when I came to Texas from Ohio, I was very excited to be able to sample all the great tamales that they have here, because of all the Mexican culture. When I started dating a Puerto Rican, I learned about pasteles and how different they are, and how much more superior a pasteles is to tamales. But these little tiny things that we sort of take for granted, that we sort of grow up in, that inform our culture and who we are, those help to inform the us as well. And then there are things like traditions, right? Things that we don't really understand why we do them. We just know that we do them because our parents did them and our grandparents did them, and so we just sort of keep that up. Things like holiday traditions. Why do we set off fireworks every 4th of July? Because everyone always has, right? Whatever, right? So the little things like that, and then being able to share those things with other people and seeing those traditions play out with other people helps to inform the us, the idea of us. And then also religion, right? Religion actually comes from the Latin to bind together, right? Religion can be the thing that binds us together. It can also be the thing that tears us apart when there are differences in religion. But very often, as we understand who we are and sort of where we fit into the world, we often think about the circle of people around us, just like here we are today on a Sunday morning at a UU church in Fort Worth. This is an us that's formed right here and right now. So these are all different ideas of who the us is and where this comes from. But if there's the us, then there's also the them. And what in the world is wrong with them, right? Because if the them were as good as us, they would be us, but they're not. If they were like us, they would be here, but they're not here. Why not? What is wrong with them? And there's a huge list of things that we can pick from if we are interested in thinking about what is wrong with those people, right? So first and foremost, very, very common thing. Before I get to that, this is a different formulation of the verse from Mark, right? So this is actually the same exact idea, but it's expressed in a different way. So in Matthew, they have Jesus say, not those who are not against me are for me. He says, those who are not with me are against me. So it's a little bit more exclusively phrased in Matthew. And they who do not gather in with me throw away. Which means if you're not doing the same thing as me, you're doing the opposite to me. If you're not with me, you're against me. If you're not part of the us, you're the them, and the them are those who are in opposition to me. And this is a very kind of a troubling idea. And as I was mentioning, there's lots and lots of ways that we can find where people can be in opposition to us. First and foremost, being politics. Politics has always been, let's not pretend it's always been some love fest. Even going back to the founding of the country, and before that, as long as politics has been a thing, the struggle for power, people have always wanted to grab hold of and maintain and use power over other people. That's not anything new. But we see the expression of political divides and the political them as much more distressing, much more upsetting now, perhaps, than it has been in a few years. There's also somewhat trivial things, like pop culture. So when I was a kid, the big question, the big division, was whether or not Star Wars was better than Star Trek. And you could only pick one. If you were for Star Wars, you could only be for Star Wars. If you were for Star Trek, you could only be for Star Trek. And now that's kind of changed. Now there's new Star Wars and there's new Star Trek, and now the division is whether the new stuff is better than the old stuff. And the whole conflict has become very complicated. But there's all sorts of fights that people can fight over whether or not they like a certain thing in pop culture, whether it's Marvel versus DC or whether it's whatever, right? And so all these fights can become very divisive and can cause a split between the us versus the them. There's also sports. Sports is a very big thing in Texas. It's a very big thing all over the country. In Ohio, where I'm from, my brother is a football coach for a team that has had a rivalry going back 100 years. And it unites the town that he's in. They're all completely on the side of their own football team. And they have parades and they chant up and down. But what they're chanting is to defeat the next town over, right? So they have a sense of shared identity, but it's at the expense of the next town who are their neighbors. And they chant, beat McKinley, beat McKinley, beat McKinley, because that is what unites them. But what unites them is the opposition to the next town over. In addition to sports and things like pop culture that are somewhat trivial, there are literal divisions that separate the us from the them. This is the construction of the Berlin Wall, which literally divided the city of Berlin between the Western the UK and France and the United States versus the Soviet Union after the Second World War, when they could not agree on how Germany should be allowed to proceed, and so they actually cut the country in half. This was a literal division between an us versus them. And even here in Fort Worth, here in the United States, there have been not literal walls, but metaphorical lines drawn down neighborhoods. So this is redlining in New York City, the same sort of phenomenon that happened in nearly every major city in the United States, including here in Fort Worth. And all you really need to do is look at municipal maps of specific ethnic demographics to see the effects of this and how these lines that were drawn on maps divided us versus them in a myriad ways. And then on the very personal level, and all, the horrific level as well, and a somewhat ironic level, it divided people who should not have been divided in the first place. So this is an example of violence that was committed during the Rwanda genocide. So during the Rwanda genocide, there were two different groups of people, the Hutus and the Tutsis, that lived in Rwanda. And the Hutus massacred Tutsis whenever they could. The Tutsis were actually in the minority, and the Hutus were much more populous. But for years, and actually this goes back to the origins of European colonialization, the Tutsis were given much more political power in Rwanda. for the completely arbitrary reason that the Europeans thought that the Tutsis looked a little bit more racially upstanding. They looked a little bit more sort of Ethiopian, and there was more consideration for people who happened to look like that. It was for no other reason. In all other sense, they were completely the same. But the Tutsis were given power, and the Europeans divided the country because of that division. And the genocide that happened, not to say that it was a good thing, but it was an outgrowth of that division that was created artificially by the European colonizers. And the person that you see here who was attacked by a machete, he was bludgeoned, sliced up with a machete, and yet lived. This was not a Tutsi. Although many, many Tutsis were attacked in this way, this was a Hutu. But this was a Hutu man who disagreed with the genocide, who opposed the genocide. So the other Hutus that were perpetuating this imprisoned him and attacked him and cut his face up with a machete, just like they did to the Tutsis. So these divisions that are created, this us versus them, all of a sudden it's uncomfortably easy for an us to become a them in the right circumstance. So what then do we do with this us versus them dichotomy? Is this a true dichotomy that we should understand the world is organized by? Or is this a false dichotomy? I submit that this is a false dichotomy. The world does not need to work like this. The world does not need to be divided into us versus them, because doing so causes all these problems that we've just discussed. But first, let's reject this false dichotomy. And then next, there's a concept that I call the ally of convenience. And this concept of a convenient ally comes originally from a Sanskrit military guide that was written thousands of years ago in India. It's somewhat akin to the Art of War. It's a guidebook for military strategy. And in this work, which is called the Arthashastra, the guidance is, if you're a king who is in control of a kingdom, the guidance says, anyone who borders your territory is your enemy. That is the only reason, that's the only condition that needs to be met. As long as they border your territory, they are your enemy. But anyone who borders your enemy's territory, but does not border your territory, is your friend. Right? So this is framed as a work of, or as a concept of military strategy. If you're a king, if you're running a kingdom, anybody on your border you should think of as your enemy. Anyone who's your neighbor should be thought of as your enemy. But if your neighbor has a neighbor that's not your neighbor as well, they're your friend. Because they can antagonize your enemy, but not necessarily you. And this concept is a little bit better known under the aphorism, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But so what does this mean? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Well, it means that anyone, first of all, that this concept that people on your border, people who are neighboring to you, that you should attack them, that they should be your enemies, right? This goes back thousands of years in human culture. This goes back further in our evolutionary history. This is a photograph of chimpanzees at war. I don't know if anybody has ever heard of the Gombe Chimpanzee War. But this was something that was described by Dr. Jane Goodall as she was doing her studies of chimpanzee behavior and sociology in the Congo. And the idea, or the early idea of how chimpanzees were, and chimpanzees, of course, are our closest relatives, evolutionary speaking, but the earliest thoughts about how they operate is that they're relatively peaceful. They sort of sit around in these troops and they eat, and they groom each other, and They might have internal struggles for power, but that's pretty much it. They're seen as somewhat idyllic, primitive. But during this period of time, as they watched these chimpanzees, they noticed that there was one troop of chimpanzees on the northern side of the forest and another one to the southern side. And they saw this happen spontaneously, that groups of male chimpanzees would peel off from the northern tribe and they would venture down into the territory of the southern troop. And whenever they would find a lone chimpanzee from the other tribe, they would all jump on it and tear it limb from limb. And when I say tear it limb from limb, I mean that literally. They would tear pieces of flesh and skin off these other chimpanzees. It was a horrible, awful way of dying. And they did this over and over. Over and over, they would make incursions into the southern troop, and eventually the southern troop was no more. So the few that remained fled someplace else, and the females that remained primarily were absorbed into the northern troop, and the northern troop took over both territories. So this concept that if someone is on your border, they are your enemy and you should destroy them, this goes back far into our evolutionary history. And and it's something that manifests even in relatively modern times. So we have an example of just after the Civil War, one of the most famous family feuds in the United States history, the Hatfields versus the McCoys. This was a fight that lasted for many, many years. This involved two extended families, the Hatfields and the McCoys, on either side of the Ohio River. One was in West Virginia, one family was in Ohio. If you were to pick any of these people out and lay them all together and look at them in a line, you would not be able to distinguish one group from the other. But they hated each other. They hated each other. And what's more, although this was immediately after the Civil War, this was not something that really extended the violence of the Civil War, as some people thought initially. So the first person that was killed was someone who had been a Union soldier. But every other person who was killed on both sides, in both families, were allied with the Confederacy. So all of these people were just Southern affiliated rednecks who just happened to be in different sides of a river, in different family groups. And that was all it took for them to murder each other in broad daylight, sometimes at night. There was one instance where someone went over and snuck over the river and set fire to another family's house while they slept in it, and they burned to death. Also a horrible way to die. But just thinking about the borders that exist and trying to figure out this strategy of, okay, well then who is my friend? The person whose border is not on mine, but maybe bothering somebody else's. This is something that we've seen play out in human history very recently as well. And one of the greatest examples is the alliance between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union during World War II. This shows a conference that was held at Yalta towards the end of the Second World War, when it was sort of a given thing that Germany was going to be defeated, and the Allies, represented here by Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin, wanted to figure out how Europe should be divided up and what the resolution should be after the war was over in Europe. And Stalin was no real ally to the West. And yet they were militarily linked for that period of time. But we've already seen how that played out in Berlin. It resulted in the building of a wall. It resulted in a prolonged Cold War, the buildup of nuclear weapons, tremendous anxiety on both sides when the enemy of your enemy is your friend. And more recently, we've seen this with the situation in the Middle East. That is, relatively recently resolved now. This is Donald Rumsfeld shaking hands with Saddam Hussein. This is somewhat a famous picture that came to light after the invasion of Iraq, after 9/11. Prior to 9/11, prior to that time, Iraq was an ally of the United States. And Saddam Hussein was someone who would find himself shaking hands with Donald Rumsfeld, who was later the Secretary of Defense. And why? Oh, because they both hated Iran. Iraq and the United States were both in opposition to the state of Iran, and so it became expeditious for them to create an allyship that ultimately resolved in a very different way. But the thing about this phrase, if the enemy of your enemy is your friend, if that is something that is true, then you can phrase this in a slightly different way. It sort of implies another conclusion here. If the enemy of your enemy is your friend, then the friend of your enemy may also be your enemy. And that is a very difficult thing to wrestle with. That concept, the friend of my enemy is my enemy. That increases the number of enemies that you might have in the world. You look at the world that way. And that is something that happens today. Very frequently, again, there's conflict, there's adversary that we find ourselves in. But it's not just one person and another person anymore. It's you against that person and any friends that they might have. You're in opposition to them. This was expressed pretty clearly by George W. Bush immediately after 9/11. For those of you who lived through that, as I did, President Bush got on television at the end of that day, that fateful day, and he expressed a concept that he used, or his administration used, to justify the invasion of Afghanistan and eventually to justify the invasion of Iraq and the deposition of both governments, including Saddam Hussein, our previous ally. And the Bush doctrine is expressed this way that he gave during that speech. He said, "We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them." Which means we are not just going after the terrorists. We are going after anyone who is friends with them. The friend of my enemy is my enemy. That is the Bush doctrine. And that concept defined American foreign policy as prosecuted in the war on terror, so-called, for the next 20 years, at least. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbored them. Friend of my enemy is my enemy. And this led to the invasion of Afghanistan, as I said. This led to the invasion of Iraq. And both of those were successfully prosecuted by our military. Both countries were invaded. The governments were thrown down, deposed. But did it make for lasting change? Is the world now better for having looked at the world that way? Well, in Afghanistan, perhaps not. This is the evacuation of Kabul just a couple years ago, when the last American troops pulled out, and the allies that we had locally, friends that we had made, the friends against our enemies, many of them were left behind. And the Taliban took back over the government in Afghanistan. In Iraq, it's a little bit different. In Iraq, there is a prime minister still there. There's a government still in Iraq that is friendly with the United States. This is Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi a couple years ago, shaking hands, announcing the end of the combat mission in Iraq. And the government that we helped install is still in power. So looking at the world in that lens, saying to yourself, the friend of my enemy is my enemy as well. That might not work out well for us. We look at the world that way. And finally, a concept that I find sort of especially troubling. And I call this the razor of hypocrisy. Now, I have a house now that has teenagers and preteens, and they are, dare I say, experts at identifying hypocrisy. And I think one of the reasons for this is because when you're at that age, you're transitioning from being a young child and looking at the world in a very trusting way. That the things people tell you, the things that adults tell you are told in earnest and for good reason. And you know, your parents know best, your grandparents know best, your teacher knows best, and the best thing for you to do as a child is to simply follow those directions, follow that advice, follow what they tell you to do. But as your mentality transitions into something a little bit more adult, you start seeing that the world doesn't exactly act like that. And even these figures of authority don't exactly act like that. The rules that they may have you follow, maybe they don't follow themselves. And there might be good reasons why they don't follow themselves. They might be rules only for kids, not for adults. But that's hard for you to see sometimes. And so teenagers start seeing the world as just one huge landscape of hypocrisy. And so they start using your own words against you. Well, you said this. And then you have to be dealing with your own advice, your own directives being thrown back at you. And when I think about that, I think of the verse in Matthew where Jesus said, "Put your sword back, for all who draw the sword will die by the sword." And those who use directives and make orders might find themselves on the opposite side of that. In fact, more than might, right? All those who draw the sword will soon die by the sword, right? So what Jesus is saying there is that, no, this is an inevitability. If you use these attacks on other people, these attacks that you make will be made on you as well. And, you know, there's sort of the concept of the old gunfighter who, at a certain point, you become so well known, you become so famous as a gunfighter, everyone is coming for you, everyone wants to take you down. And so if you're a gunfighter, if you're a famous gunfighter, how are you likely to die? In a gunfight, right? In a gunfight. And here in Fort Worth, we have sort of the famous example of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. In the movie, they were shown in a kind of a romantic way as becoming the victims of the violence that they had perpetrated, right? Their actions came back to get them in the end. The violence that they perpetrated was visited upon them. And in the movie, it seems very romantic and lovely. But in the real world, the violence that you put out into the world is ugly. And I think of Rex Hoyerman, who was recently discovered to be a serial killer in Gilgo Beach in Long Island. And he put himself out there as an upstanding member of his community. He was an architect, he was a homeowner, he was responsible, he was married, and yet he was doing these horrible things in secret. He was doing violence in secret, and living a very different life. That is murder as hypocrisy. I find it very difficult to believe that you could do murder in any other way that does not betray you as a hypocrite. Because anyone who lives in this society, if we expect to live in this society, we expect to be treated well. We expect to be respected. But murder betrays that. It's a betrayal, and it becomes a kind of a hypocrisy. I also think of this individual here. This is John Stevens, known as Fluke Skywalker. You see, he has a very obvious resemblance to an aged Mark Hamill from the new Star Wars movies. He was someone who dressed up like Luke Skywalker from the movies, and he would do a lot of events, a lot of charity events in Cincinnati, my hometown. He would raise a lot of money, and he would donate it to the Ronald McDonald House, which seems great. Right? Ronald McDonald House, if you don't know, is a charity organization that provides medical care and support to kids and their families that can't otherwise afford it. And this guy, John Stevens, is doing a lot of work for several years, raising money and showing up looking like Luke Skywalker. Just this week, he was discovered to have child pornography on his phone and on his computer, hidden in different places. And he was booked and arrested in the Hamilton County Jail. He was living a very different life than what he showed to the world. He was living a life of hypocrisy. And that caught up with him. The same thing that he was putting out there was not what he was really living. And it eventually caught up with him. The thing about hypocrisy is also that sometimes we don't expect the behaviors that we see, the behaviors that we learn about from some of these famous figures. I'm thinking of one of the most famous figures in the 20th century, Mohandas Gandhi, right? Who was crucial, who was leading the fight for Indian independence. And he is looked up to. He was called the Mahatma by the Indians. He also slept naked with his grandnieces every night. Every night. And this was known, but not very well popularized. Every night he would sleep naked with his grandnieces. Now, he would say that it was so that he could ensure that his celibacy was as pure as it could possibly be. That was what he said. Do we believe that? No. Martin Luther King Jr., the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a wonderful advocate for civil rights in this country, also a perpetual adulterer, was constantly cheating on his wife, Coretta. In fact, on the very day that he was killed, he was with another woman in that hotel. And she wanted to go with him, she wanted to go in the ambulance with him to the hospital. But the men that he was there with, his team, wouldn't let her because of how it would look. But on the very day that he was killed, he was cheating on his wife. And what his associate Ralph Abernathy said later in his autobiography, he said, "We all understood and believed in the biblical prohibition against sex outside marriage. It was just that he had a particularly difficult time with that temptation." Everybody knew that he wasn't the moral exemplar that he presented himself to be. But they also allowed him to make moral pronouncements from podiums such as these. What does Matthew say again about hypocrisy? It says, "Do not judge, and you will not be judged, because the judgments you give are the judgments you will get, and the standard you use will be the standard used for you. And I like it a little bit better, the metaphor that gets used later. He says, this is Jesus talking again. He says, why do you observe the splinter in your brother's eye and never notice the great log in your own? And how dare you say to your brother, let me take that splinter out of your eye, when, look, there is a great log in your own? Hypocrite! Take the log out of your eye first, and then you will see clearly enough to take the splinter out of your brother's eye. Hypocrisy is a blade that cuts both ways. And perhaps we should be careful about how we present ourselves. Are we ourselves consistent with who we claim to be when we're thinking about others and who they are? Are they consistent with what they claim to be? And this is why I think all of this, and I bring this all together. I think about the fellowship of adversary. This idea that we come together and we define ourselves by what we're opposed to, by who we're not. And I think we clearly divide our society just by instinct. And this is something that comes to us from our evolutionary history. We divide our society between the insiders and the outsiders. And when we do that, we antagonize those who make common cause with our enemies, or those we perceive as our enemies, the outsiders. But when we do that, I think we should remember we are ourselves subject to the same attacks we might make against other people. And that is why I think that we must be careful to avoid the fellowship of adversary. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Moore, for that thoughtful reflection. Join together in singing our closing hymn today, number 346. Come sing a song with me in your gray hymnal. Please stand if you are able and so moved.
Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Come dream a dream with me. Come dream a dream with me. Come dream a dream with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time.
Now for our closing words, The World is Too Beautiful by Eric Williams. The world is too beautiful to be praised by only one voice. May you have the courage to sing your part. The world is too broken to be healed by only one set of hands. May you have the courage to use your gifts. May you go in peace. The flame is extinguished, but not our hope for the future, our courage in the face of crisis, or our love, the love we share in all the world. Join me, please, in the congregational closing. Go in peace, seeking justice. Go in peace, committed to equal rights and opportunities for all. Go in the peace that is created when together we build communities of true solidarity, deep compassion, and fierce, unrelenting love. Go in peace. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.